Okay, this is the second part of the structural violence section, the new slavery. I'd like you to start by watching these videos. The first one here is a documentary style video. It's a bit older on the concept of modern slavery. It does a pretty good job of overviewing what exactly we mean when we talk about modern day slavery. This one here in the middle, this is a TED Talk given by a journalist that did a lot of work in the Middle East, who it's less than 20 minutes. And then this bottom one here is another TED Talk given by a woman who actually survived human trafficking and discusses her experience and how she came to be involved and what happened to her. They're all very powerful videos, but I would encourage you to watch all of them throughout this section. That way you can kind of put a face to what we're talking about. So structural violence and this new slavery. Slavery is one of the more basic forms of structural violence. The extreme exploitation from slavery has been outlawed throughout the world because of the recognition of the violence that slavery does to humans. It is a booming business in the world today, though, and its dramatic growth is linked to the growth of inequality between nations and within nations. So even though it's illegal, it's happening, and it's happening very dramatically because of this structural shift between those with the haves and those with the have-nots. Slavery is a part of the globalization of the world economy. And according to Bales, this gentleman who's done all this research, slavery is found in virtually every country, and that the products that slaves produce extend throughout the world economy. So even if you don't feel that you're contributing to this type of behavior and this type of exploitation, if you're buying the products that slavery produces, you are encouraging the continuation of this cycle. Knowledge is power. Estimates of the population. Bales estimates that the total world population of slaves is approximately 27 million. That has probably increased. Based on that, the slave population today is larger than all of the slaves taken from Africa during the slave trade. And that lasted several hundred years. And it's also greater than the population of Canada. That's how many people are in the slave trade today globally. The International Labor Organization, the ILO, we're going to be referencing them quite a bit, has defined slavery more narrowly as forced labor and as one specific type of forced labor. So according to the ILO, slavery is understood as the condition of forced labor where the situation is a permanent one and is often based on descent rather than one with a fixed duration. For Bales, the permanency of it, or whether there's a fixed duration, is not central to the definition. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between how we are defining what exactly slavery is, whether it's for a fixed amount of time or it's just something that happens. Either way, it's a large number. According to the ILO, it's about 12.3 million. So about half of what Bales' estimate is. But like I said, there's a couple of discrepancies there between the definitions, which accounts for that difference in the numbers. So where are these slaves at? Bales found that the largest proportion of slaves, 60 to 70%, are in bonded labor in places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. This is also consistent with what the ILO estimates are. However, in more transitional and advanced societies such as Eastern and Southeastern Europe, the pattern of forced labor is different, where the dominant form is a result of illegal trafficking for the purposes of sex. So where in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and in those areas, it's actual forced physical labor working in sweatshops. In Eastern and Southeastern Europe, it's the sex trade. Still slavery, just for different types of purposes. So what causes this? According to Bales, there's two factors that explain the growth in slavery since World War II. The first is that there's the dramatic growth in world population. More than tripling from 2 billion to 6 billion today. He finds that the greatest growth in slavery has occurred in the areas of the world that has experienced the greatest growth population. So there's just tons of people. These are the poorer areas that don't have access to healthcare, don't have access to birth control. They have a severe stratification. There's more instances of child marriage, sexual assault. So there's a lot of people having babies. So there's this explosion of people. And if you don't have the resources to take care of them, that's where the second part comes in. It's the rapid social and economic changes that occur in those regions of the world that are increasingly being integrated into the world system. So they're trying to keep up and they're trying to get involved in the world economy. But these places on the periphery or on the frontier of empires, where the empire is coming in, is where there's the concentration of conflict and competition for resources. So these people are being pushed into this global market. They don't have access to resources for themselves and their families. There's this dramatic increase in inequality as these populations become displaced. And that is where these pools of slavery come from. According to the ILO, there's very little consensus as to the cause. They do point to the problem of persistent poverty, high levels of inequality, especially in less developed regions of the world. They point to the indigenous people of Latin America as more likely to be enslaved than the ethnic majority. So again, those who are stratified on the lower rungs. The ILO also points to the fact that women in poverty are more vulnerable than men, especially in the human trafficking sector of forced labor. So if you look at our stratification table, this table that I'm always looking at, or always talking about, this hypothetical dining room table, those at the top that sit at the head of the table are less likely to be exploited through human trafficking. These are the dominant ethnic group in the region, whether it be white or, in the case of Latin America, the ethnic majority there. And then those at the end of the table, or the kiddie table, these are the people on the lower rung of the stratification. These are the children. These are the poor. These are the women. These are the ethnic minorities. These are the ones the most disadvantaged. The people that have the least resources are the ones that are more likely to be trafficked. As in every other form of violence that we have talked about so far, this is the same group of people that is targeted in every single aspect of violence. And this is the golden thread that goes through every section that we've talked about. And I hope that you guys are all having a really good awareness of that so far. So old slavery versus new slavery. Bales made an important distinction between old slavery of the 19th century and new slavery of the 20th and 21st. The first major distinction is that there's no legal ownership in new slavery. So in the past, slaveholders had title. They had legal authority and formal ownership of their slaves. The new informal ownership, there's no legal documents. It is strictly through the use of violence or the threat of violence that causes this bondage between the owner and the slave. Because of that, they're able to circumvent these laws, which essentially only outlaw legal ownership. In the former system, the cost of a slave was pretty high. In today's dollars, it would have been a slave sold in the South in the 1850s could cost between $40,000 and $80,000. Whereas the debt of a bonded slave in India today can be as low as $12 to $15. But if the family doesn't have it, and the poverty is so high, and the cost of living is so high, if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. Given the low cost of the slave, there are higher profits to be made from slavery today than in the past. This is capitalism at its finest. You buy goods for low prices, you mark them up, and you sell them for a profit. The marketing and trafficking of human beings is no different. Bales notes that because of the low cost, they're also easily disposable. The slaveholder has very little responsibility, very little investment, and they can easily be replaced. We see a lot of abuse, a lot of murder of these people because of that. The last important distinction that Bales makes between the old and new is that in the earlier system, ethnic and racial differences was important in distinguishing slaves from masters. It was very easy to walk around the southern United States and pick out who was the master and who was the slave just by the color of their skin. For the most part, the only distinction between a slave and a slaveholder today is their economic position. One of them has the money and the other one does not. Poverty is the one feature that distinguishes all slaves from their slaveholders today. So there are three forms of slavery, according to Bales. The first, which is the closest to the old, is chattel slavery. In this form of slavery, a person may be forced into slavery by means of capture, they're born into it, or they're sold into servitude. It is the second and largest number of slaves. The second and largest number of slaves is debt bondage. In this form of slavery, the person who is to be enslaved gives their self as collateral for a loan of money. So if you loan me X amount of dollars to pay this debt, or, you know, so my son can have an operation, or so my wife can get medicine or something like that, I will give myself as collateral for said money. The third form is contract slavery. Bales notes that contracts are offered to the potential slave as a guarantee of employment, either in a workshop, a factory, domestic servant. But when the workers are taken to the place where they are supposed to work, they find that they are enslaved. They're forced to work for no pay. They're no longer free to go home. This is the most rapidly growing type of slavery in the world, and it is the second largest as to the number of people who are enslaved as well. Here you see a couple of young girls at sewing machines. These young men are fishing laborers. So with the ILO, the slavery or forced labor by governments, both the ILO and Bales report that research cite the example of slavery that is committed by governments. Restivex, these are children sold into domestic service. The word restivex is from a French word that means to stay with, and this form of child slavery is found in parts of the Caribbean and West Africa. So these are children that are sold into homes to help with cleaning and chores and stuff like that. Bales notes that although these are distinct forms of slavery, they're not mutually exclusive. He notes in his research that chattel slaves may have been issued contracts in order to hide their enslavement. The contracts are just pieces of paper that say that they're there willingly. Of course, when you sign a contract like that, expecting to be paid and expecting to be able to come and go as you please, and then you're told that you can no longer do that, as long as that contract is still there, you can't really say anything. Girls who are enslaved as prostitutes by debt bondage may also have contracts. However, the threat of violence is key to distinguishing between free and unfree labor. Here's a story of this young girl, a 6-year-old in Kabul. None of these pictures are of her. I think it is very easy when we read these things to think of, oh, you know, it's this concept of what a 6-year-old looks like that can somehow get distorted. We often, when we hear stories about young women and young girls being sold into the sex trade, it's easy to think of them as being more mature than we might otherwise think, or to see that they look different than you do, and that changes somehow what their experience is. This is literally just a collection of pictures of 6-year-old girls. These are the types of pictures they should be taking. I will let you guys read through that. I'm not going to read through it. It's a very powerful story, though. this young girl here, this is the actual girl in the story. This is the 6-year-old. She is being sold into slavery by her father because he is unable to pay a debt to save his wife's life. So this is what slavery looks like. I, again, would encourage all of you to go back. Make sure you're watching these videos. They are open to being used on the exam if I feel the need to. If you have any questions, post them to Blackboard under the Content Questions tab on the online class. If you have any suggestions or you come across any news stories that are relevant to the topics that we're talking about in this section, please send me a link to the news story so that I can post it on Blackboard to allow everyone else to share in that real world example. And I will post the next lecture shortly. Thanks.